As the world's population passes 8 billion, we face a host of challenges: poverty, hunger, gender inequality, climate change, and migration that affect global development, particularly in developing countries.
Education is the passport to the future, but what if some passports are better than others, giving the holder access to better schools and teachers, and in turn a more prosperous future? These inequalities have been around long before COVID-19, but the pandemic has both exacerbated them and made them more visible. While the standard of education varies greatly globally, education inequality happens at the local level in all countries. For example, only 4 out of every 100 children in Africa is expected to enter a graduate and postgraduate institution, compared to 14 out of 100 in South and West Asia and 36 out of 100 in Latin America. Even in developed countries, the quality of schooling can differ greatly whether rich or poor. High national wealth, then, is no guarantee of high equality. The UK, Germany and the US are among the richest countries in the world, but all three rank poorly on an educational inequality league table of 41 of the world's richest countries. By the middle of secondary school, educational inequalities are worse than in other countries with much smaller economies such as Latvia, Spain and Estonia. However, research has shown that child development is linked with income. Unsurprisingly, the US and the UK have some of the highest levels of income inequality among OECD countries. In the UK, there has been a significant lack of social mobility since 1945. As wealth inequality has remained high, there hasn't been much change in how well British children are doing at school.
The project was called Gender Education and Global Poverty Reduction Initiatives, and we started it in 2008. And we were concerned to look at South Africa and Kenya and international organizations, and we were interested in the first 3 Millennium Development Goals: the one on poverty, the one on education, and the one on gender equality. And we were struck by the fact that there was a lot of debate about whether the Millennium Development Goals were a good idea or not a good idea, the whole process by which they'd been decided, and then a lot of discussion of the content of the Millennium Development Goals, the MDGs. But very few people seemed to be looking at how they were being implemented in particular kinds of contexts. So in South Africa and Kenya, we did 5 case studies of the National Department of Education, a provincial Department of Education, a school in a peri-urban area serving a poor community, and then a rural NGO, a non-government organization, and then what we called a global NGO, one that was working in the large city, discussing with Europe, USA, and the kind of aid community. And what we found from the study was very interesting. We found that the further you moved away from that kind of dynamic of discussion and location of money and power in the capital cities and around a kind of community that was putting in practice the MDGs, the less people knew about them, the less they felt the issues that were important to them, which they expressed in a lot of different ways, a lot of it quite incoherently linked to practice.
And did they also not link to the goals themselves? So,
yes,
for example, the education goals?
Yes, so their issues were not being reflected by the goals, which a lot of people have said, that the goals didn't respond to local issues. But what we also found is that the ways people were not able to put together gender, education and poverty, there wasn't an academic language about that, there wasn't a professional language about that, and there wasn't a policy language about that.
But was there a local language about that? I mean, did students, for example, pupils in a school connect their schooling with their own potential poverty reduction or in their lives, a change in their lives?
What we found is that students struggled to articulate that the problems they were facing were other than their own fault. And we found that students had a stronger knowledge of the complexity of poverty and the social dimensions of poverty in schools that had better access to information, so that very much students would say, I've got to pray to God, or something's going to happen that will turn me into an airline pilot or a doctor. So students, while they felt the experience of poverty, they didn't see the social dimensions of it. And teachers who were very close to what students were experiencing, their hunger or the torn clothes, the inability to concentrate, again lacked a kind of professional language to put that into a social context or to think what they as teachers could do about it. So then immediate response is to blame the poor parents, which was a feature that we saw not only amongst teachers, but we also saw it amongst education officials, and to some extent we also saw it in the NGO community. So it highlighted the need for the MDGs, I think, to expand their remit, I think, from just meeting particular targets of reducing poverty or getting all children into school, to developing a much more reflective and critical language about how people think about poverty, how you think about poverty and gender and education together.
So one of the things that, where I work now at the Department for International Development, one of the things that is obviously being looked at is the post-Millennium Development Goals, what comes next. And in terms of gender, not so much education, because I don't think there is that link across the two, but the big discussion is, should it be a standalone goal or should it cut across the other areas? And I would guess then that the latter, whilst you don't want to lose the standalone goal and the sort of momentum that can give, that this research might suggest that gender that they need to cut across somehow more.
Yes.
"2023 was the warmest year on record, with very high number of extreme weather events. Global emissions are also at a record high, with fossil fuels being the main driver. The impact of climate change is most direct in poor areas."
From countries
Extreme weather
oppression,
events
and
and
fear
natural
force
disasters
people to
caused
leave their
by
homes.
climate change, such as droughts, floods, and rise in sea levels, have forced people to leave their homes and to become environmental migrants. These migrants can face poverty, hunger, malnutrition, and food insecurity, as well as social and economic impacts in receiving countries. Now, conflicts and natural disasters have prompted millions to emigrate.
Many children have died at sea trying to reach the European Union this year. Yet despite the risks, they keep coming.
أنا عندي بنات اتعبنا كثير قررنا والقرار كان صعب كثير إنه قرار السفر يعني بنعرف رحلة موت هي وبنعرف إنه في خطر كبير على حياتنا بس بالنهاية مثلك استوت عنا الموت والحياة إنه يا بنعيش يا بنموت أفضل من الاستمرار على الشكل اللي كنا عايشين فيه بتركيا.
Where are you going now?
Going to Almania.
How many days since they've had the medicine?
When did you leave there, Zor?
Human Rights Watch sent teams of researchers to document the dangerous journeys
Were you many people coming?
and the hardships upon arrival.
The governments there say go back to Hungary.
We spoke to Syrians, Afghans, Iraqis, Eritreans, and Somalis. In story after story, we heard that the only way out of violence and terror at home and unbearable conditions in neighboring countries was to resort to smugglers and flee through dangerous crossings.
Population growth, especially in developing countries with limited resources, exacerbates poverty, hunger, malnutrition, and food insecurity. More people mean more demand for food, and if agricultural production fails to keep pace with population growth, it leads to food shortages and higher prices, exacerbating poverty and hunger. Hunger, malnutrition, and food insecurity. The three are closely related. Food insecurity can lead to hunger and malnutrition, and hunger and malnutrition can further exacerbate food insecurity. In addition, malnutrition can lead to retarded growth in children, affecting their health and future.